Brian Carroll here with Professor Stuart McGill, and we just finished up an assessment, and now we're doing a little bit of talking about back mechanic, specifically back mechanic, the video enhanced version. And those of you that have back pain and you've not read back mechanic, or you've read back mechanic and have not purchased the video enhanced version, I think it's the best $60 or $70 that you'll ever be able to spend. It's literally Professor McGill walking you through the entire stages of back mechanic, every chapter, how to identify causes of pain, positions of respite, how to move, how to rebuild the motor. And the book is good on its own, but the video that corresponds with it is priceless. It's worth significantly more than it's priced for. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about back mechanic, which was originally released 10 years ago almost. And so we're going to talk a little bit about back mechanic, and in particular, why you advise never sacrificing form, especially when we're talking about strength training and heavy lifting, just to move more weight in back pain.
Yeah, I will follow maybe a reverse logic to answer that, Brian. Think of the last 50 patients that you've seen, and you listen to their stories and interpret the patterns. Would more than half of them in their story be related to an incident of lifting with poor form or exposing themselves to something where your body is simply a linkage that has to support load? If you misdirect the forces onto vulnerable tissues, in our case, it's the back, that's the story that they tell. That is the beginning of their woeful story. So to be even more specific now, think of the number of 20 to 45 years olds that they will tell you, my problem started with a deadlift. One exercise that is becoming very popular, and unfortunately, it's not well coached. Now, who has a few powerlifting records and the highest squat of all time? We know who we're talking to. Can you imagine lifting a very light weight with awful form and how easily invulnerable you would be to injury? People assume some of these exercises with high loads are safe and easy to coach, and yet how many perfect squats did you have in your life?
Just very few, maybe two, probably just one.
Right.
Maybe a handful of.
Right. I remember when I was a professor, I'd ask students, does everyone know how to do a bench press? And everyone would put their hands up, of course. And then I'd say, oh, okay, would you show us your bench press? And then we would then dissect it over the next hour. And then they would realize how little they knew about optimizing an exercise to build their own body, avoid stress concentrations, because it's the stress concentration that allows injury or pain, etc. So the solution to all of this is avoiding the stress concentrations, and you do that through exercise technique and what's called good form. So what is good form would be the next logical question. And movement patterns and postures determine stress concentrations. So if I was a barber and I was cutting someone's hair like this, there's not a lot of load on my shoulders. But if I was in this position all day, and I defy even you with your strength and athleticism to do that for 6 hours, what would your shoulder be doing? It would be in pain. So that's just an example of an awkward posture of a very low load. But load is duration, it is magnitude, and it's repetition, and all of those are mitigated by rest, pardon me. So a little bit of load builds a person if it's followed by rest to allow the adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
So these things build up, but the beginning of it is inappropriate posture or load. So now we can get into uh, movement technique. Why is good form important? Let's take an example of jiu-jitsu, for example, where the whole intent of the sport is to compromise an opponent's joint and put it into a position where they submit, because they know with very little force applied, it'll either tear or injure, or it will become unbearably painful. So the idea is to strengthen and position your own body into a position of resilience and put an opponent into a position of weakness. Now, why would you train that way? So the idea is to build pain-free ability through avoiding the stress concentrations that lead to injury and enhance performance. So the last part of that whole logical story is, what does injury do? Well, almost always injury reduces joint stiffness or creates joint laxity. So consider a knee with a damaged ACL ligament, for example. The knee rotates, but then it gets a little clunk to it, and that will create tremendous stress concentrations and further pain and set up arthritis, etc. In this particular model, this dynamic disc designs model, this joint is normal. This joint is normal. This joint has been damaged just a little bit. It's had too much of a stress concentration from poor lifting posture, shall we say. Watch what happens when I now apply a general torque to this spine. This joint doesn't move very much, nor does that, but the one that's lost stiffness now has all of these micro movements. Well, now look at the load on the facet joints working away at that one level. When I bend it, the majority of the bend occurs at the joint that's lost stiffness. There's now more load on the nerve roots. The disc bulges a little bit more. So in order to use technique and posture to remove that as a further damaging mechanic for the back, create a stiffness with muscular bracing, create a muscular girdle. Now, what's a very good powerlifting coach, who are the people who bear probably the greatest load of any athlete, what would be the number one coaching cue to resist injury and maximize performance? Stay tight, wiggle under the bar, get all the slack out, to stiffen out these micro movements. So, posture. I forgot the question.
That's okay. Never sacrifice exercise form and move more weight.
So, in summary, I can't argue for training with poor form. There are some who do, but I would say, yes, if you have very low load, there are times to create elasticity in the body. Those are elastic athletes. Those are people who throw baseballs 100 miles an hour or hit a golf ball well over 300 yards, but they are not taking heavy load into their spine. So there's a time and a place for what you would consider poor form. But if you're loading it up, good form is the hallmark of every high-performance, resilient athlete I know. But they come back injured when they violated that.
Yep, and you want to not sacrifice form, and you want to build perfect engrams, so it's a default motor pattern. You don't want it corrupted by breaking form all the time, and then that can cascade as well, where the more you deviate form, it seems like in my experience, the more people break form, it just continues to be a situation where they break form even more, and then pretty soon they're super sloppy, and it's just an everyday training session where they break form just to muscle the weight up. And then those are the people that we see further back.
Yeah. You build resilience and training capacity by not overloading the tissues 24/7. You're allowing them to adapt and build as much reserve, shall we say, so that you can train with resilience and to a higher volume. So your ability to enhance fitness, whether it's strength or power, endurance, the window that you're creating to train becomes greater with better form. And you can even go to, I was at a gymnastics meet not too long ago, and you hear the coaches on the sidelines, don't break form. You can go to a marathon and hear a coach yelling, in the last mile, here's the runner. They are almost completely spent.
Yep.
But who wins? It's the one who keeps good form. It's the person who can stay tall and keep the elastics tuned in their body so they just store and recover elastic energy. It's a universal concept.
Yep, and it's I believe you say in back mechanic, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but you perfect form and then you practice perfect form every time. You don't you learn it, and just like the engrams or movement patterns or lifting form that we teach people, they start slow and then pretty soon it becomes automatic, but you practice that every time regardless of the weight on the bar, and you respect it.
How often do you hear from a back injured client who comes here and says, you're not going to believe this, I hurt my back picking up a sock off the floor?
That was the tipping point for me.
Yeah. So such a modest item as a sock took out an athlete who used inappropriate form.
Yeah. The straw that broke the camel's back. Looking for the answer to your sleepless nights, sore muscles, and better overall well-being? If so, PowerX Strength CBD has you covered. All of our products are made of CBD isolate and have 0% THC, meaning there are no worries of failing a drug test or the worry of feeling high. With PowerX Strength CBD, we offer a wide range of products and payment options to ensure you have the option that best fits your needs. Don't just take it from me. All of our reviews and client testimonials on our site speak for themselves. You can even get 20% off your order by using code YT1306 at checkout. Go to PowerXStrengthCBD.com to order now so you can get back to sleeping, recovering, lifting, feeling, and being better. I've spoken a bit, I talk with every client about virtual surgery, especially the ones that are considering surgery. They might have pain in their leg or their foot, and their surgeons want to do a micro discectomy, can edit that out too. They want to do a various surgery, and you talk about in back mechanic. Instead, in many cases, doing a virtual surgery can serve them well. What does that mean by virtual surgery, and how do they get better from the virtual surgery?
I'm going to provide a little bit of context to that. So the patients who they've been to a dozen different clinicians, and the last clinician they saw said, well, you've tried all these approaches, whether it's chiropractic, physical therapy, you've seen been to the pain clinic, you've been given meds, you've seen the pain psychologist, etc., and you failed every one. The last hope for you is surgery. If you fall into that category, and if you follow the plan in back mechanic, 95% of the people who did that in a 2-year follow-up said they were happy they avoided surgery. And so that's my evidence for that. Now, I'm not saying surgery has no role.
Right.
Surgeons are at their very best in cases of heavy stenosis and radiating symptoms that are unrelenting. They do a fabulous job at that. But if a person has a disc bulge or a disc herniation, the curious thing is that some of the largest disc bulges are the fastest to instantaneously resolve.
Why is that?
There's a lot of reasons. The recent work of, no, I can't remember the
Sorry, we'll
reference.
cut it, but I actually had this on here for another question and follow up, but take your time with it because I think people have no idea.
Okay, let's go back to I'll get into how to instantaneously resolve a disc bulge and some of the mechanisms,
Okay.
and also what we've learned recently about the health of the end plate.
Okay.
And that's all part of virtual surgery. So shall we say a moving well. So going back to that idea is, all right, so what is virtual surgery? We make a big deal of this, and we say to the people, all right, well, you can go and have surgery, and you will then lay in bed for a day or two. You'll get up and go to the restroom and slowly organize your recovery in a progressive graded fashion to get you back. Well, as it turns out, if you pretend you had surgery and then you act like you did in your recovery, 95% of the time, you will be happy after 2 years, whether you had surgery or not. So it begins by dialing back physical activity and just resting, letting things settle. Now, it doesn't mean laying in bed all day. That's not resting at all. But don't do too much of any one thing. Don't sit too long. Don't stand too long. But you must walk a few steps every hour. And then within a few days, you walk 3 or 4 times a day, 10 minutes. You get the idea. And the idea is to then move within patterns that we describe that do not create stress concentrations in the back. So the hip hinging through the hips would be one. Learning how to turn the hips rather than the spine would be another, that stop twist maneuver. Learning how to lunge, which would help a person tie their shoes without stress concentrations in their back, etc. Then the next component is to be very strategic in choosing exercises or exercise tools to enhance appropriate mobility and appropriate stability. So if a person is able to control the stress concentrations in their back by building their core and then translating that core control to activities of daily living, but really help them with their hip mobility, with their shoulder mobility. Now, back pain and hip pain, as it turns out, creates loops that inhibit and facilitate other patterns. So it'll be very familiar for some people with back pain, when they stand up out of a chair, they feel a tightness in the front of their hips. It's very hard for them to pull their hips through without feeling that resistance. Most of the time when we measure it, that's called neurogenic facilitation of the psoas muscle. So if that is recognized, you can create very specific exercises to release the facilitation of the psoas muscle. Nothing wrong with the psoas muscle. That was the neurological reaction from pain. Another opposite of that would be a inhibition, neurogenic inhibition. The back pain caused the brain, when they're extending the hips, to not emphasize the gluteal muscles to extend, but it emphasizes the hips. Well, when the hips extend through the hamstrings, the femoral head in the socket is pushed anteriorly because of the vector of the muscle. And then the person squats down and they get a pain in the front of their hip. More hip pain feeding the neurogenic pathology. Certain exercises that you coach very well are very much intended to emphasize the gluteals in the brain control pattern once again. And as the person extends their hip, the action of the gluteal muscles pulls the femoral head back out of impingement. So you get a double benefit, not only to the back, but also to the hips. So these are things that then need to be transferred to daily life.
Mm-hmm.
So the next part of the training is to, okay, we've built strategic stability and mobility. Now train the patterns so that they become second nature throughout the day. And then the person is on their way now to a pain-free and resilient life, which is that's the name of the game.
Give them hope.
Give them hope, but it started from confirming these things with a very thorough assessment. And we start the assessment in back mechanic, and that informs the choice of exercise, the volume, the progression, etc., to chip away at this and restore pain-free abilities.
Yonda referred to it as cross pelvis syndrome, right? And you've referred to it as glute amnesia, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's pretty common that we see. And so people might try to stretch their way out of the psoas, which might be appropriate, or it might be coming from L1 to L3 potentially. And that's why one tool could be someone's gold. That same tool for the next person could be their poison. It could further send them down the cascade of pain and injury, and then they go from person to person. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my psoas? What's wrong with my glutes? But they haven't gotten an assessment.
Right. The root of all of that is this concept of non-specific back pain. Have you ever heard of anyone with non-specific leg pain? I haven't. Any competent clinician would assess the mechanism of their leg pain and come up with an appropriate intervention to address the cause. So in the same ilk, back pain is very specific if you test for it. The problem is there's very few clinicians who really do a thorough, competent assessment of the back pain. Figure out what the mechanism is and come up with the appropriate intervention. So a deadlift might be a very good tool. It was certainly good for you in a certain part of your training. We certainly didn't start there. And but in the next person, they might have some real end plate damage, which is the cause of their back pain. It started with a deadlift. More deadlifting will not take away that particular pain mechanism. So you choose tools to try and get the body to adapt and become resilient for that particular pain mechanism. So if we take 10 people who come in with nonspecific back pain, not one of them is nonspecific. Every single one of them is specific, and they all might be different. So they will all get a different program informed by what the assessment showed. And as they go through the recovery process, not everyone recovers at the same rate. And there will be different schedules. And some people, they're my age and they just want to play pickleball. All right. Well, that's a very different athleticism than bike riding. It's very different from swimming. It's extremely different from golfing. Yes. Which is potentiating the elastic athlete. And can you think of the last person who came in and we will strength train you to play golf, and then they go out and try and hit a golf ball a long way with muscle, and it doesn't go very far because they have, when a muscle contracts, it creates force and stiffness. Using too much muscle slows down the club head and eventual.
It's like pushing a punch.
Well,
throwing it with your hips.
Yeah,
you don't muscle the punch; you snap it.
Yeah,
turn it over with the hips.
Yeah,
you don't muscle a golf ball.
Right, and this is some people are very impressed with big muscles on the combat athletes, on the fighters, and as one of the few people who've measured the strike power and force in some top combat athletes, I fear the ones who don't look like they are that strong.
Anderson Silva.
Well, I didn't test him, but
I'm just thinking of like when I see someone that ungodly power, but you'd look at him, 6'3", 220 pounds. Yeah, he somewhat athletic, but not a guy that would crack your face with a step away jab.
Well, let's take one of our good friends, our mutual good friend, who is the highest, who's got the greatest number of knockouts in the UFC.
Yep, Matt Brown.
Matt Brown. So our friend Matt Brown, I mean, we love Matt. Matt doesn't look like a big muscly guy, but Matt is a beast. And what Matt does is he turns the hips through a stiffened core, gets a perfect thrust line, and then he stiffens his body into granite from the back foot all the way through the linkage, and he knocks people out. It is a fabulous. We were talking earlier about good form and bad form. It's all good form. It's a fabulous skill, but the speed that his fist hits with backed up by turning his body to granite is what knocks people out. And, I can get really scientific here and say, well, kinetic energy.
So it's a double pulse, right?
It is. I can talk about that, but just, I'm getting old, Brian. I have to think about these. So I'm going to talk about kinetic energy for just half a minute. Think of the knockout punch. It's kinetic energy. And if you can get the skull to spin, it's a much better knockout. So a contact blow to the chin off center to get the head to spin, the kinetic energy delivered is a square of the velocity. So velocity gets squared. Velocity is really important, but you put velocity, so you create closing velocity by being relaxed. I use big muscles, quick.
Right.
But Matt is cat quick and then delivers the granite-like backing up of that thrust line with the velocity that he delivers, not because he has huge muscles, but he just has the technique to get the closing velocity very high. And then mechanically, the velocity is squared. It's you'd rather be hit by a car.
And he's practiced with perfect form, so that's the default motor pattern when he snaps a punch.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to think about it. It's default. It's perfect practice every time. It's not just practice.
And
it's perfect practice.
Yeah. And he does the same with a kick as well. That kick that comes around, it's really a cracking of the whip. He doesn't kick you through the knee it might be a short Muay Thai technique and a clinch or something. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking a roundhouse kick. And we've both heard it. It's the most awesome thing. And to think that someone can stand there, withstand it. I would never walk again if he kicked me. But the technique of it is he stiffens the core, the rib cage and pelvis stay together. The hip comes around, the hip snaps down, and the leg comes around like a baseball bat. It is such perfect technique.
Why is it so important to keep this together? You refer to this rib cage and pelvis,
right?
Well, sternum, and why is that so important to us now?
The power in most athletic power developing situations comes from the biggest power muscles, which are the hips. If I push something and it bends, I lose power. So if I'm trying to push the shoulder a certain way and the spine bends, that's called an energy leak. All I did was create that beautiful hip power and it bends my spine. Well, that's not very effective for moving my shoulder. So there's a time to be mobile and loose, and there's a time to be stiff. That's the magic of athleticism. So the importance is the hip generates the power, transfers it through to the shoulders through a temporarily stiffened spine. Boom! You hear a tennis player grunt. What are they doing? It's a hip turn, not a spine twist that develops the power. Those are the ones who don't hit the ball as hard. It is the ones who turn the hips, grunt and stiffen the core, and then unleash the whip through their shoulder and their arm through the racket to the ball. So, it's a common theme. This is a linkage. It only moves so many ways. But it's surprising sometimes at so-called experts' lack of understanding of how a linkage works to get the job done. There aren't that many ways to do it, so there are somewhat universal principles.
And so rotational power, that's one of them to get the most.
Right. Now, if you're a swimmer and you're rotating, but good, that is much more of a fish type of athleticism, to take the entire body.
Kind of hard to relate to that.
Yeah, to have floppy ankles make a faster swimmer.
Yeah.
Well, do you think a world-class sprinter has floppy ankles?
Nope.
No, it cannot be. They have to stiffen them just the right amount so that when you load energy into the foot and ankle, that creates a bend and a storage in the elastic joint capsules and ligaments and tendons, and that's recovered again but that wouldn't help a swimmer one little bit.
Then you'd be floppy.
Yeah,
fish.
Yeah. Big floppy feet would be a mechanical advantage to swimming. So there would be an example of having a fish spine, or a reptilian spine, as we call it.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be the kiss of death for someone who wanted to hit a home run in baseball, which is a hip turn. And it's amazing when you stop the film and see, of course, there's a disassociation of the rib cage to the pelvis, but at the point of contact, quite often the pelvis and spine align. The bat slows down, hits the ball. There's a pulse, usually through external rotation if they're batting right, through the right foot in the ground. That's why they wear spikes on their shoes. And then the elasticity again releases for speed, and the ball takes off, and they follow through. So that very much is a pulsing, elastic. It's a pulsing strength.
And I can tell you from someone who played baseball, that's a very hard thing to do, master the baseball swing and hit a pitch that moves sometimes a couple feet. It'll die on you. It'll rise on you. You got to guess the pitch. And to be able, there's a reason why there hasn't been someone hit 400 in however many years, because even getting out 6 out of 10 times is Hall of Fame. And hitting a baseball is extremely difficult to do, but you practice perfect with the swing. And you start with soft toss, or it might be hitting off a tee to get the mechanics down. And that's how you really dial in that baseball swing, because it's automatic, and then you react depending on the velocity and the trajectory of the ball, and you got to read the stitching. I talked with Pete about this. I'm not sure what the hardest thing to do in sports is. Hit a golf ball with precision consistently and perfectly, or hit a baseball consistently with precision and hit close to 400.
Well, you and I have consulted with a few different sports and athletes, and just because I'm older, I may have consulted with a wider variety of sports on this planet. And I can't think of too many Olympic sports where I haven't had a back injured athlete. And the joy, one of the big joys in my job has been I actually get to see the best specimen in the world at doing that thing of that sport and figuring out what it is. And if I'm really lucky, I get to play tennis with a world-class, Grand Slam, multiple Grand Slam winner. And it is just so awesome what their talent is. And I'll go to a different sport, and I'll get to roll on a jiu-jitsu mat, or well, when I was younger, I played American football. Not great, obviously, but again, just to feel the power, to catch a football from an NFL football quarterback who's not drilling it at you, but just boom, Oh, it is the most awesome feeling. It's like a car mechanic who gets to drive a fuel dragster one day, an F1 race car the next, a Baja Desert Racer the next, the pinnacle of it all. And every single one of those athletes is different.
And then a lot of the times you learn from these top athletes that you work with, and you can reverse engineer how to work with the layperson by learning with how people do these things at the most advanced level.
Right.
You learn the tricks and the tips and things that you may not learn in the lab. You learn in the clinic and the training center and vice versa. And they're that good for a reason. Some are genetic freaks, but they do it so well.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing to see. I mean, one time I had Dan Marino throw me a fastball, football. Just kidding. We'll edit that out. But just seeing these guys, perfection every time, and it goes back to the first question we talked about today: never sacrifice form. You're not going to see Tom Brady out there. It might be a sidearm play, but every time it's the same drop back look. Every single time it's perfect. You don't see him get sloppy when he won his 7 Super Bowls. You look at the top running backs, every single thing, it's perfect practice every time. And I think that people should do the same and follow the same approach. You talk about in back mechanic, not just about practicing and getting good at something, but perfect practice and creating those engrams. That's what it's about. And that's what the best do, whether it be the tennis players, the footballers, the power lifters, the Olympic lifters, or just the people that are trying to do CrossFit. And I think that is one of the biggest impediments for people with CrossFit. It's the opposite. It's the antithesis of controlling form and not breaking form. It's about as much exercise as possible in a condensed time in a racing fashion, mixing up Olympic lifting, powerlifting, cardiovascular, gymnastics. If I could create in my short time of working with people a perfect storm for injury, it would be something like a CrossFit model, because it's so demanding in every way, and you cannot perfect and tune a body to be able to do all those things.
Yeah. Doing CrossFit versus competing in the sport of CrossFit is two different things. And sports test humans in different ways. So a CrossFit competition is, yes, they put on these enormous strength and power challenges, and the key is don't break form.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the sport. Don't break form. The stories that we both have of you can watch a person perform repetitions of beautiful power tests,
Mm-hmm.
exercise tests. And you can usually see when failure is going to occur, not when failure occurs, but the lift before. Something broke down in the lift before. They lost their core, or the hips slid out a little bit. And what that does is the brain is curious. I'll give you an example of someone walking downstairs who has a ligament deficiency in their knee. Occasionally, that knee will give way and buckle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happened? The brain felt a little bit of joint instability because of the laxity of the ligament in that one knee, and the brain shut off the signaling to those muscles. And they fall, and maybe they get further injured,
Mm-hmm.
or they damage the knee further. Exactly the same thing happens with the back. When the brain perceives that flaw or loss of core control, and that micro movement occurs when they're competing in a power or in a fatigue state, and they allow that to occur, the brain shuts down the neural drive. It shuts down their strength. And athletes will say, yeah, I've just lost the power in my glutes. I've lost the power in my back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what are we going to deadlift you?
Mm-hmm.
No, we are going to deal with the instability. Deal with that first.
Mm-hmm.
And allow that system to regain its ability to withstand load once again. Then we can get back into the strengthening loading exercises with good form. and restore their resilient athleticism.
We talk about then gift of injury together in your book, Back Mechanic, about slow graded exposure. You don't just go from feeling a little bit better, the pain starts to subside. That means you're starting to heal. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make, in my opinion, is there's many clinicians and coaches that can get people free by dumb luck, because some would say dumb luck or just not knowing, or just doing a virtual surgery and they shut things down. But then as soon as they feel better, they go right back to the CrossFit and lift, and it just continues a cascade until everything hurts them. That's just an observation that I've made, that they do get rid of the pain, but they're not healed. Then they go right back to loading up with those deadlifts or whatever was causing that micro movement or instability, and then they end up significantly starting to damage the posterior bony elements, or the mechanical collision between the end plates there, and it just gets worse and worse and worse, just in my experience.
Going back to the program and mechanism that caused you to become painful and out of commission in the first place makes no logical sense. You're just hitting your thumb with the hammer over and over and over again. You got to change things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the, shall we just say, skill of returning a veteran athlete back. You can't just send them back to the mechanism that caused their pain in the first place. So figure out what the mechanism was, and maybe they weren't resting enough. Okay, what's the optimal rest now?
Mm-hmm.
Is it, Pavel Tsatsouline, our good friend, chairman of Strong First.
Genius too.
He's a genius. And probably the most well-read and best person to put this into practice. What is the appropriate rest? Well, let's look at the work. And he knows American powerlifting tradition. He knows Russian and Bulgarian powerlifting tradition. And their rest cycles were all very different.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they worked differently, but they also had to train differently. So if you train heavy once a week, the typical Ed Cohn kind of, the golden age of American powerlifting, as Pavel describes.
And I agree.
Yeah, tremendous. And I think that was the impressive thing when I first started working with you. Some people would look at your program, your colleagues knew, but the average person watching you train would say, "Oh, you're undertrained. You, do a heavy deadlift session once a week."
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the week was maximum recovery from that session. And then they'll listen to someone describing, it might be a bit mythical, but nonetheless, the Bulgarian system of you lift heavy every day. Only a few lifts, but now who lasted the longest? Then you start examining some of those statistics. But there's different recovery for all of those systems. The Russian system was different yet again. But Pavel is very, as I said, wise in and it doesn't suit everybody as well. You have to figure out what is the best approach for you and for me, and not that I will ever be a deadlifter.
That's something that I have many talks with younger lifters about. It's which approach is best. And I think a lot of it, there's so much variance with approaches to programming, the different blocks, the conjugate, the progressive overload, which I lean towards, with built-in deloads like I talk about in 1020 Life. You have the high volume, high frequency, ranging intensity, where these athletes will squat, bench, and deadlift 3 times a week. And those are the biggest injury mechanisms I see for the powerlifters that come to me. We examine their training program. We'll edit that out. But the clients that come to me will give me their program, and I'll see, man, these are all pain generators when we look back. But one of the biggest things that people have to weigh, you talk about you like to use the scale. We weigh the scale, and some things, some approaches to training, even some of the Russian methods, it comes down to, yes, these methods can work quick. They are overloading, they're too much. You might be able to get very, very strong in a short period of time. You might even be able to achieve more in that 5 years. But what's the end goal? Do you want longevity and a great career and maybe possibly not pay for it quite as much down the road? But maybe you do. Or do you want 5 years to go all in until the wheels fall off? And I talk to clients about that. Like, it really comes down because people get brutally strong quick, squatting, deadlifting, and benching with high frequency, but they fall apart within 2 or 3 years, and they've gotten significantly stronger. So I let the person, I give them the experience that I have and the things that I dabbled with when I was in high school, benching 3 times a week. Well, you can recover from that, but I wasn't squatting or deadlifting. So it really comes down to, do you want to just go until the wheels fall off for the next 5 years? Or do you want to go slow and steady and figure out what works best for you, have longevity, and keep some in the tank for a 2-decade career instead of a half of a decade career?
Yeah, yeah. I was listening to that and just thinking of Mike Boyle, who we both know. And Mike says, anybody can coach an 18-year-old and get results, but it doesn't test the coach. There's so much resilience there. There's so much speed and recovery. It's just who you're dealing with. He calls it the filet mignon of athletes.
Optimize hormones.
But
everything.
you take a 12-year NHL veteran and keep them competitive and operational.
Mm-hmm.
Now we'll see if you know your stuff or not. You do not have carte blanche to even have a minor injury, but you still have to keep their performance up. Now we'll see who knows their stuff. And that's when you separate out good coaching from, and I don't see too many of those coaches saying, oh yeah, do a few lifts with bad form because in the NHL you get out of position. Not one, because that will injure that player. And now the career is over because of the fault of the coach. So going back to that original conversation a little while ago.
You see it across every sport. The best do it the same every single time and have those perfect engrams.
Right. The number of athletes who've come to me. Well, an example of this, a very good one, was how many years ago? It's quite a number now, where the NHL went on strike,
mm-hmm.
Right?
It's been a while.
Yeah. And so it was a prolonged strike, and the younger NHL players, they sort of went to Europe to play during the strike, or, mm-hmm. But the older players took that time off to heal. And a few of my colleagues saw, Clayton Skaggs is very mm-hmm. close to us, very good clinician out of St. Louis. And he was seeing a number of them for their shoulders. Mm-hmm. He's a fabulous shoulder clinician. Yeah. I saw quite a number for their back. But the point of the story is those players, 12-year veterans, they had MRI scans of their spine from every single year in the NHL. They brought them. I also knew their statistics, how many pucks they put in the net, how many games they played missed because of injury, how many games they did play. I had all the statistics, both performance and resilience, plus their MRI images, and I also had their training program for 12 years. And you could look at that and you could see, there's the spine. Okay, well, you've got a little bit of an M plate. A very minor injury in the mm-hmm. M plate, but the disc is still doing its role, etc. No games missed because of an acute or a chronic back situation. And then what happened? The next year, you've got a disc bulge. What happened? Oh, the coach I was with was having me do heavy loaded Russian twists side mm-hmm. to side, which is loosening the collagen. Did the miles an hour on their slap shot in the NHL skills competition go up? No, it did not.
Nope.
And then the next year, they come in with a full-blown disc herniation. What did you do that year? Oh, I was with this trainer, and we started ass to grass, deep loaded back squats.
Mm-hmm.
What were you thinking? When was the last time on ice you did a heavily loaded, deep back squat?
Can you even do it?
Pardon?
I don't even know if it's hardly possible to even do that on the ice skates.
No, but
You obviously don't do it in the game, but it's crazy to think about.
You can't, but that's what was documented in their training, and you could see their MRI. Now they've got a big disc bulge, and now they played 30 games that year.
Mm-hmm.
They lost 45 games because they were disabled because of their trainer.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, I was going to a good trainer. No, you weren't. You went to a person who didn't understand what the demands of the sport were, the demands that have to be met to play at high level. Anyway, you go through that exercise and examination of individual players and start putting the patterns together, and you will see that training with bad form is you can't justify it.
Mm-hmm. I think that one thing that I hear that in my mind, I just replace the words when they say I'm going to a really good trainer or a really good clinician, and they're obviously not. I replace the word in my head with someone I really like. Not good. They don't understand that, but they just really like that trainer. They're not a good clinician. So when they say that, automatically, when I see their programming, I see their MRs, I see the cascade of injury. No, or they're a nice guy. Yeah, okay, they're a nice guy. You really like them, but
or
you're saying,
that trainer, he worked me out. I couldn't walk afterwards.
Yeah.
And then I think, what a terrible trainer. So for the next 2 or 3 days, you can't train properly. They way over loaded you, crossed the tipping point, and you are actually in a state where you cannot train. What kind of training is that?
Stimulate, don't annihilate.
Yeah, exactly.
So sometimes people get their MR back. Doctor tells them you've got a massive disc herniation. Well, it's not that having a disc bulge or herniation is good news, but sometimes the larger ones tend to respond better, or they might vacuum back in. What does that mean exactly? Vacuum back in and shrink. We're talking about disc herniations and the different types of bulging and lesions of the disc.
Well, you're absolutely right that sometimes the bigger the disc bulge, the more completely and the faster they resolve, which sounds so paradoxical. 4 pieces of evidence there. The first one is somewhat clinical. There's been a couple of recent studies, more than a couple actually, that show don't take anti-inflammatories, and it propels the resolution of the disc. In other words, the inflammatory response is a good thing. So how does that work? Don't inhibit it by taking anti-inflammatories. It might be better in the short term, but not in the long term. So that's the first piece of evidence. Rajesh Karan's work has won 2 ISLS awards as being the top research papers in the world over the last 6 or 7 years. And what they have shown is what we showed for years on our cadaveric studies. Some of them were on animals, some of them were on humans. But if you are taking a spine and flexing it over and over again and adding compressive load, if the end plate, which is the top and bottom of the disc, which is basically a heavy cartilage plate, if it micro damages, it increases the rate at which the disc bulge occurs. So the outside of the disc are collagen fibers, but they anchor up into the cartilage through Sharpie's fibers.
Mm-hmm.
And if you damage those, they delaminate faster so that the repeated flexion movement under a load keeps pushing the nuclear gel posteriorly until it forms a bulge. Well, as it turns out, Mike Adams proposed a number of years ago, probably, well, in my opinion, the best all-time disc biomechanist in the world. And he and his wife, Trish Adams, another great scientist, proposed this idea of there being two phenotypes of end plates and the bone underneath in the vertebra. One is in the more tending to be in the upper lumbar and the thoracic spine, and this follows families. In other words, this is an inherited characteristic. The bone breaks behind the cartilage, which allows a Schmorl's node or that kind of a fracture. That tends to be more inherited. But the other one is the nucleus being pumped through delaminated collagen for a posterior disc herniation in the lower lumbar spine, which is clearly repeated loaded flexion. In other words, it's the overload of motion and load, not so much governed by what you were inherited through the bone resilience, shall we say. So that starts to give an explanation why someone like you had massive disc bulges, end plate fractures, etc., through heavy overload, cumulative overload, and yet you then took years to adapt a resilience, a bone matrix, reestablishment of a sealed collagen to come back and set the world record. So thank your mom and dad for that.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have for you.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, so this is all explanatory of why people react a little bit differently. But it only sets up the answer to the question, which was, why do some of the bigger disc bulges? So now I'm getting into the mechanism of what's causing them. Now let's go right to the answer. A really big disc bulge. Now I'm going to the work of Peng Fei, which is a Chinese group. And in my opinion, they've done some really groundbreaking work in the last few years. And again, this follows what I've written about for years from our clinical observations. Big discs. Years ago, 30 years ago, when I'd be working with patients, someone comes in and says, oh, my disc bulge is now gone. And I never thought in a million years of them doing bird dogs and whatnot will have any chance.
Right.
But they did. And it was the bigger the disc bulges. So we strongly suspected this. When an end plate damages, remember that's the beginning of the story. So it starts with something like a heavy deadlift with bad form, you damage the cartilage. And then if you keep doing bad form lifting, bent right over, the collagen fibers pull off and they delaminate, and the pressurized nucleus behind finds the weakness and works its way through posteriorly with each poor form repetition.
Through the hydraulic pressure
Right.
being created.
If there's bony damage there, you will see edema in the bone. Now, the orthopods will call that a modic change. I don't. It's a bone bruise. It is edema and an inflammatory response at the bone that anchors the collagen that forms the annulus of the disc. If that is in place, the chance of spontaneous reduction of the disc bulge greatly diminishes. So we saw that clinically. Peng Fei has now shown that to be epidemiologically true. What's the mechanism? The inflammatory response has all kinds of I'll just call them chemicals for now, that invade the disc bulge. They vascularize it, and that's what causes the disc bulge to shrink. It propels it even more. If there is edema in the bone, the chemistry changes and it inhibits that. So I hope you keep your end plates pristine. And I hope you allow the inflammation, you being an injured disc bulged person, allow the inflammation to do its job. And there's 4 scientific studies, shall I say, that help explain why that resolution can occur in the biggest disc herniations, some of the preconditions, and how to train for it in a way to help propel all of that.
And you talk about different ways of achieving that through back mechanic. Some people, you have chapters on positions of respite,
Right.
different variations of tummy lying.
Right.
A lot of people gravitate immediately towards the McKenzie school of thought.
Right.
And for some people, the directional therapy is great.
No question.
70% or so of the disc height, it can be beneficial in small bouts, depending on the pain generators and how many levels are affected and that kind of stuff. But it also can start damaging the posterior elements. And a lot of people say they start with a pain that's discogenic or a disc bulge. Well, they get another MR and their disc bulge is resolved, but then they have a cranky, big facet with arthritis and edema. And then that pain stays with them sometimes even longer than the disc pain did.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. There's no question that for some discs, and we were the first to measure this. Robin McKenzie was still alive at this time, and he and I had some really good conversations about this. What we found, and this was with the work of my PhD student, Joan Scannell, we created partial disc herniations. She created, I'll be fair, she created partial disc herniations and found that she could vacuum in the posterior disc bulge through a McKenzie floppy push-up maneuver if 60 to 70% of the original disc height remained or more. In other words, this didn't work on flattened discs.
Mm-hmm.
So those McKenzie practitioners that promote floppy push-ups repeated, it's true. In some people, it really helps very quickly. In others, it's a poison. It isn't for them. Some therapists who don't know any better will say, just keep pushing through it, keep pushing it. And you are right. They will present back at the clinic in half a year with a whole new extension intolerance as the facets are flared up, the spines are kissing posteriorly, and etc. Having said that much, I hope and wish people would stop prescribing the floppy push-ups and that directional therapy for longer periods of time. 2 weeks, yes. 2 or 3 months, no. The price they pay for disturbing some of the extensor mechanisms and what they will eventually do to the facet joints, because the disc is already flattened, much more loads going into the extension. So
you have a disc model that shows a
yeah,
flattened disc versus a nice
so
disc.
So you can see the grinding taking place on the facet joint, and if you squeeze the disc and then really load the facet joints, and again, life isn't fair. The angle of the facet joint matters. So some people will be taking much more frictional loads on the interface, damaging the joint cartilage in the facet joint, and other people, they just glide by one another. So, again, it comes back to great specificity. There's nothing non-specific about the back. If the clinician understands the mechanics and how the stresses are determined by the anatomy and the features of the anatomy, it's a one-to-one match. You can predict with surprisingly high precision where the next part of the cascade is going to emerge of a person's back pain. So just to finish off that story, if I can, we found that if you isometrically lay on your tummy versus doing the dynamic floppy push-ups, the disc resolution, if the bulge is going to resolve, it's just as effective by a static position and hold it for somewhere between 6 to 8 or 9 minutes, depending on how dried out, shall we say, the nucleus of the disc is, etc. So that's a little bit more of the nuances of all of this. And
a common practice that I see from physical therapists or spine specialists is 10 floppy push-ups on the hour all throughout the day, every hour. And the facet joints that I've seen are just absolutely destroyed.
Yeah. Well,
from that.
they come in, you do a simple facet load test, and they'll say, oh, yeah, that's my ache.
Mhm.
Did you have the ache before? Nope.
I had some pain
The
down
therapy created the new pain. So now you've got, as a clinician, a double challenge. You're still dealing with the disc. You've got some joint instability that now the sheer micro movements are triggering nerves in different patterns. One day the pain is down my right leg. The next 4 or 5 hours, the pain is down the left leg and going to a different toe or something. These are all hallmarks of a joint that's lost its control. So it's truly mechanically unstable. And now there's a facet joint that is, we can prove, is now the extensor pain mechanism, and it's a very characteristic local ache right there. They can put their thumb on it. And winding down facet pain takes a long time.
And stiffening strategies aren't always effective for getting them to calm down.
Yeah,
I found that sometimes you can get lucky, but it really wound up when it just has to calm down. It can take 4 or 5 months for some people just to calm down and stop having that pain right there in that area. Versus before, they had some tingling down their leg. I thought they'd resolve it by doing 100 McKenzie's a day.
I think of 2 very high-profile athletes in the last year where when a person extends their back, if the facet joints are open, it puts extra stress on the pars bone. After doing the McKenzie floppy push-ups to excess, we would then see on the MR edema in the bone. And then, now, I saw it, they didn't come to me yet, but they had the MR.
Right.
And they kept doing it, and then you see a crack forming. And now you can follow it on CT scan, the crack, because they keep doing it, it's a stress strain reversal on the crack. The crack keeps propagating, it breaks, and now they have a spondylitic fracture.
It hasn't necessarily gone full on.
Right. And then if they keep on going, it then becomes spondylolisthesis, which is a real challenge. Of course, a lot of people can get through it, but a lot of people can't. And that's when, again, our surgical friends do their best work.
Hope you enjoyed today's video. Remember, like, subscribe, share, click the notifications because we drop videos twice a week. We also have a live stream every Friday where I answer your questions. Click below to see the latest video that we uploaded. Also, for our products, our CBD, our books that correspond with these videos, it's down in the description. For more information about all things Brian Carroll and Power Rack Strength, go to powerrackstrength.com. You could book a consult both virtually and in person with me. Enjoy your week, and thank you so much.